A little while ago, we had the subject about fear of criticism, shyness, being nervous and afraid of what others will think. This is a really big problem for a lot of people, including myself. Much less now, but it was really a big problem before. And it can make its appearance in different forms, being nervous, anxious, agitated, being tense, feeling frozen, insecure, being shaky when speaking, for example, being worried, feeling inferior, feeling ashamed, guilty, doubtful, confused, uncertain. We can even go on. But all is really mainly rooted in being afraid of what other people think of you, being afraid of the criticism of others, or afraid of the judgment of others. Being able to really remove it deeply requires meditation, practice of correct mindfulness in everyday life. It's not only by analyzing and understanding. However, understanding is extremely useful, extremely helpful, and there are a few main points to understand that can help a lot and already go quite a long way to reducing the load of this problem. So firstly, this fear of criticism or attachment to the judgment of other people is not just there on its own. It's based on particularly the condition of having attachment to a self, to our ego, the attachment to the image of ourself in the other person's eyes. If we have no self when talking, for example, how can there be any worry over what others will think of us? Or if I'm only talking out of pure compassion for the one for whom I'm speaking, if I'm using my words as a gift for the other person, which also implies speaking what is true, what is useful, speaking something whose aim is to bring the person higher, then how could I be afraid of what they will think of that or how they take that? It's like a gift and it's up to them to accept it or to refuse it, and it's nothing to do with me. However, if I'm talking with the need for others to be impressed, if I want them to think well of me based on what I think, and that's part of my reason for talking, then there's a place for shyness, agitation, stress to enter. So this is something to consider. What if you take yourself out of the equation and just speak the message that is needed to give? Then how can there be any worry about what the other one thinks? Another important condition for shyness or agitation or nervousness to arise is having doubt or uncertainty about what we're talking about or about what we're doing. It's particularly obvious or easy to see in speaking, because in general, how we speak to each other is that we don't talk about things that we have seen and experienced ourselves. We pick up ideas and pieces of information from different things that we read, different things that we have heard, things that we like the sound of, and then we speak out those things as though they were our own ideas, but without ever having tested them for ourselves. Then there's always this fear of being refuted, fear of having your argument crushed, because you're not sure of yourself. You're not sure of what you're talking about. You haven't seen it or tested it yourself. If the person asks me this question, I won't be able to answer. What if he asks me something and I look like an idiot? So, of course, if we're talking out of our hat, then it's true, anybody can come along and ask us a question that we won't be able to answer because we haven't thought through the subject, we haven't looked deeply into it, we haven't verified it. But if we know what we're talking about, and we talk from our own experience with honesty, having understood our subject, then we know what we're saying and there's no space for this insecurity to enter. Of course, it is true that when you are in society and having to interact with many different people and speak on different subjects, it's not always possible to only speak about things that we have personally seen and understood, like directly to be true. But then it's just to be honest, to say, oh, this I haven't seen, but I've heard from somebody else. Not to be attached to our ideas too, to be open to hear what somebody else has to say, not having to prove that we are right. If somebody asks us a question to which we happen to not know the answer, being simply prepared to say, oh, I don't know, I'm not sure about that. If you ask somebody a question and they say that they don't know, will you laugh at them and think they are so stupid and how could they not know the answer? How could they say they don't know? If you say yes, well, then it's you who has to go and work on some qualities first. So there's no need to prove we know everything, which brings me to another point, which is that when we are nervous in front of others, it's really often based on a kind of comparison between ourselves and them. I have to be either superior or inferior. This weighing ourselves up in comparison to other people. If I'm not superior, I must be inferior. So therefore I have to show I have superior knowledge to be superior. But this is all nonsense. Like, there's no need to have this comparison between ourselves, superior, inferior. We have a body and mind. They have a body and mind. We have a skeleton. They have a skeleton. We have to eat. They have to eat too. If we watch our own mind for even a little while, we can realize just how automatic it is, how much the nature of it is changing every second, how much it's out of our control. Do we think their mind is different? There's no need for superior or inferior. We can ask ourselves, for example, would I be nervous if I was talking to a group of chickens? Or if I was talking to all the fish in the sea? No, I wouldn't be nervous. Not because I think I'm superior to the chickens, or because I think I'm superior to the fish. There's just no comparison. Finally, a third point that is pretty important to mention, and that is really mainly relevant when you are practicing Dhamma, when you are working on morality, working on yourself, working to improve yourself, to be better every day, to be wiser every day. This is the work to depend on yourself, to be independent to yourself, which really means to rely on the results of your own thoughts, words and actions by learning how to think rightly, how to speak rightly and how to act rightly, and practicing this, instead of waiting for others to tell you what you do is good or bad. What happens a lot in the world and society is that we actually don't even have a clear sense of whether we are good or whether we are bad. We measure our own sense of worth based on what others tell us. So if somebody tells me I'm a waste of space and I'm useless, I will think maybe I am a waste of space and I'm useless. And of course that will make me feel pretty bad. And if, on the contrary, somebody tells me that I've been such a good help and I'm such a good person and they appreciate me so much, then that will make me think, oh, that's true, maybe I am a good person and they appreciate me and maybe I'm good to be around. And that will make me feel good. And the consequence of this is that we look for this approbation and this approval from others in order to make ourselves feel good, instead of looking for what is actually good and bad and correcting it ourselves inside ourselves. And this has many consequences, one of which is shyness, being nervous all the time, but it has other consequences too that we might not necessarily notice and that are also quite damaging. For example, we will prefer to associate with people who tell us nice things instead of associating with people who are wiser than us, who can tell us how to correct ourselves, which is a really pretty big problem. But if we have learned the difference between what is good and what is bad, what are good qualities and what are bad qualities in ourselves, and now our highest value is on goodness, on qualities which we find in ourselves and grow in ourselves, we're working every moment not to accept wrongdoing in ourselves and to develop and grow good qualities and wisdom, then whether somebody approves of what I do or not makes no difference to me, because I know I'm conscious of making effort and working every day, every moment to do good. So for example, even if we are conscious of putting a lot of effort to make a really good meal for somebody, it's still possible that they don't like the taste of the meal, either because even though, let's say, for us it might taste good, for them it doesn't taste good, or because even though we put a lot of effort and attention, it's still possible that we make a little mistake, or out of lack of experience something goes wrong and it just doesn't turn out very good. So if we are needing the other person to be approving and happy with the result of what we have done, then of course we'll be disturbed if they happen to not like it. But if our value is on the quality with which we made the meal, that is, that we made effort, that we did our best, that we were doing it with good intention all the time, then we don't mind, we can correct next time, and it's not a big deal, we're not disturbed. Again, on the other hand, even if somebody points out a genuine fault in myself, if somebody points out to me a place where I've been careless or a place where I have had an impurity that I didn't notice, then as well that's no cause for me to feel upset, angry, insecure, because my aim is also to remove these faults, corruptions, impurities in myself. So I have no cause to be anything but grateful that they tell me of how I can correct. Now, this last point should be taken on the understanding that it doesn't mean we have to accept every criticism that is thrown at us for any reason. For example, if somebody tells me it's so stupid to practice celibacy, if all the people in the world did that, then soon there would be no more human beings left. This is obviously not a criticism that I should take because it's not in line with what I'm practicing for. My aim is to remove all impurities from myself and go out of suffering. It's not my business to propagate the human race. We can be criticized by many different kinds of people, some of them very wise, some or most of them not really wise at all. So this obviously has to come into consideration. Receiving criticism from a teacher who we trust and who we have seen to be wiser than us is a very different thing from just being criticized by any random person on the street. It doesn't mean that the random person on the street can't potentially give you useful criticism, but you have to evaluate what they say based on your own understanding of what is right and what is wrong. Does it help you to go towards your aim or not? Does it help you to be a better person or not? So when we really are having this aim of improving ourselves every moment and working on our own minds, working to depend on our own good actions and our own wisdom, it really changes a lot how we view the fact of being criticized. So to summarize, the fear of criticism or fear of judgment has three main causes or conditions that make it grow. First is having a self, an ego, which needs to prove himself to the other person, to impress the other person. Part of that is also needing to see oneself as superior or inferior. Secondly, it's having doubt and uncertainty about what we're talking about things that are sort of recycled ideas especially, and needing to prove that we are right about those recycled ideas. Thirdly, it's depending on others to validate or to approve of our actions, in other words, just to say that we are good. On the other hand, if we practice and work to think, speak, and act unselfishly instead of selfishly, if we speak of what we have seen and understood and verified for ourselves instead of recycling ideas, and if we practice morality and aim to correct ourselves constantly, consciously removing faults and adding qualities, then we are becoming an island to ourselves, and so we can't be hurt by criticism. But all of this is much easier to say than it is to do. In particular, it is really essential to develop proper mindfulness for all of these things.